Okay, so I'm here to show you some of the things that go on behind the scenes in the back of an ambulance, because we're all familiar with the stretcher, the first aid bag, the oxygen, the monitor, all the cabinets where we have our supplies, the main suction, trash can, all of the things that we have to know how to use, take care of. But there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that make this ambulance work. So in particular, the driver should be aware of where all these electrical items are, so that if there's a problem, you can take care of it so you can function as a ambulance. Obviously, we all have computers or MDTs. They have to be charged on a regular basis, and they receive power from the ambulance. The monitor receives power from those receptacles, either by the shoreline that is plugged in the back of the ambulance, side of the ambulance, that gives the ambulance 120 volts, or if the ambulance is unplugged, it's on a call, it's sitting in a parking lot somewhere, the hospital, it needs still 120 volts. So there's a component on the ambulances called an inverter. So release the latches, remove the panel, set it aside, and inside here there's all kinds of wires and buttons and switches and things, most of which you don't need to tamper with, but there's some things that you need to know. So this big white box here is the inverter. So if you notice, there's a receptacle right there, and that receptacle is a GFI receptacle, a ground fault interrupter. Very similar to what you see around your kitchen and counters and bathrooms. It's an extra safe receptacle. The inverter takes the 12 volts DC from the ambulance batteries and converts it into 120 volts AC, so that those receptacles, for the monitor in particular, receive the power to continue to charge. Along with the 12 volts that the ambulance has, there's a battery charger on here that takes when the shoreline's plugged in, and it keeps the batteries charged, so that things that are 12 volts, like the MDT, the farm guard that's in this compartment above here, some of the ambulances actually have them mounted on the cabinets on the side of the drug cabinet, but they all work off of 12 volts. The charger for the batteries for the stretcher work off of 12 volts. So you need to make sure that these switches are in the on position. They should be only turned off when the unit is taken out of service and it is sitting at a garage somewhere having work done, and it's to shut off the things that are non-essential, so that when the mechanic comes and gets in the ambulance, it will start. So when the ambulance comes back from the shop, these things must be made sure that they are turned back on, otherwise things won't work. So this particular switch right here is very important. It's 12 volt kill switch. It kills pretty much everything, like the MDT charger, the farm guard, the air compressor for the air horns, things that again are non-essential when the unit's being worked on, but are very essential when you're running a call. So make sure that those switches are in the on position. I will show you in other videos the layout of some of the other ambulances. They are slightly different. Fortunately, 24, 25, and 28 are exactly alike, and they are because they were made by the same company. Thank you. So as I mentioned, each unit's a little different. This one is 23. The unit that I showed a minute ago was 24. Everything, as I said, was gotten smaller over time, maybe. That's why it's quite much more in here than it was in the other. But there's your inverter, just like I showed you earlier. There's your GFI receptacle located there. Check and make sure that's not tripped if the receptacles on the counter are not functioning. Down here is it's called a disconnect box that has 2 breakers in it. Those breakers are part of the 120 volts. It protects the power coming from where the shoreline plugs into the ambulance. Occasionally, the breaker in particular that has the yellow button on the front of it, this one down here, that is a GFI breaker, very similar to the GFI receptacle concept. It has a test and a reset button. The yellow button is the test. Reset requires you to turn the breaker off and then back on to be able to reset it. If the receptacles on the counter do not work when the unit's plugged in, very likely that that breaker is stripped. Check and make sure that's not so. There's your kill switch again for your 12 volts, and that is your farm guard switch. So the farm guard on this particular unit, as I mentioned, is mounted on the side of the cabinet. That is to keep the compartment where the drug box is at approximately 68 degrees to protect the drugs. Here's 25. 25 similar design. Push the two release button clamps, take the door off, set it aside. There again, very similar to 24 in design, same manufacturer. Put this together for us as 24. There is the kill switch, and it also says it's part of powers the air compressor. If you notice, it is in the off position, so someone would probably be rather disappointed when they get in 25 and try to use the air compressor because it doesn't work. Hey, look, the farm guard just turned on too. Amazing. So this unit's been sitting here in the bay without the farm guard operational, and the MDT charger probably hasn't been working either. These are items that when a unit is returned from being out of service must be checked and make sure they're turned back on. So 26 is kind of the oddball of the units. It is the last of the Chevys, but for the most part things are kind of set up the same way. There's a receptacle for the cell phone charger, there's a receptacle over there for the monitor. Of course, your inverter switch is located on the console on all of the ambulances. It is right there. If it is not on, then those receptacles will not be lighted. As you see, that one is illuminated. You see how it glows in the dark. That should be the case with most of the ambulances. Cabinet right behind the driver's seat. There is the electronics compartment, and lots of pretty little red lights and a bunch of funny looking gizmos. So once again, there's our kill switch for something. A couple other toggle switches. Some have been labeled, some have not. Pretty frustrating. Companies that put these together don't make them so idiot proof. But there's the breaker panel, just like in 23. Make it a little easier to see. So again, you've got the breaker that has the yellow push button on it. That is your GFI breaker that protects the counter receptacles when the shoreline is plugged in. See, it says shoreline right there. And then of course this one, as you notice, there is no inverter. When you look up above the airway seat, there it is. Once again, GFI receptacle. It's got the little LED indicator light that will probably show you when it's tripped. If the receptacles in there are not functioning when the shoreline is not plugged in, I would check and make sure that that GFI hasn't tripped. Or this one down here, often plugging and unplugging the ambulance seems to cause these things to trip on a frequent occasion. So just make sure that's all good, and you will now know whether or not the MDT will have power, your air compressor, the farm guard, which again, there's a farm guard for the drug cabinet mounted on the outside. So